Nobody told you that you were supposed to want what you want. Nobody sat you down and explained that a specific logo should make your pulse move differently than a blank label. Nobody announced that certain objects belong to certain people and that the distance between you and those objects is a measurement of something real. Nobody said any of it out loud. They didn't have to. The system that makes you feel it was built long before you arrived, and it is working on you right now. Please subscribe and activate the button to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can bring you more relevant content and so YouTube can notify you when we publish new videos. The problem is visibility. Visible power is fragile power. It creates targets. It invites challenges. It requires constant defense and generates constant friction. The friction of people who resent what they can see, who organize against what they can name, who direct their energy toward dismantling what has been clearly identified as the source of their disadvantage. The most sophisticated solution to this problem ever developed is not legal structure, not political influence, not military or economic force. It is culture, the specific engineering of a cultural environment in which the mechanisms of power are not hidden exactly, they are present, visible, openly displayed but are experienced by the people subject to them, not as power but as taste, as an aspiration, as the natural and desirable order of things. Luxury is that solution. Not accidentally, not as a side effect of the wealthy simply spending money on beautiful things. As a system, a deliberate, historically refined, continuously updated system for encoding hierarchy into objects, behaviors, and aesthetic preferences in ways that reproduce the social order without requiring its enforcement. The system works because the people at the bottom of the hierarchy it creates are not merely excluded from its benefits. They are recruited into its maintenance, converted from potential challengers of the order into its most enthusiastic ambassadors, people who want, with genuine passion, exactly the things that the system needs them to want in order to sustain itself. That conversion is a masterpiece, not the Birkin bag, not the Patek Philippe, not the Ferrari or the super yacht, or the private members club with the unmarked door. Those are instruments. The masterpiece is the psychological architecture that makes ordinary people, people who will never own these things, who have no realistic path to ownership, whose actual relationship to these objects will never extend beyond proximity and aspiration, feel that their desire for them is natural, personal, an expression of their own values and judgment, rather than the output of a system designed to generate exactly that desire in exactly that form. The word luxury comes from the Latin luxuria, excess, extravagance, the transgression of limits. For most of human history, luxury was understood as morally dangerous, as the thing that weakened empires, corrupted individuals, softened the character of civilizations that had been built on discipline and restraint. The Roman moralists wrote about it with genuine alarm. The early Christian tradition condemned it systematically. Every culture that built something significant spent time worrying about what luxury would do to the people who built it. Then something changed, not quickly, not in any single decade or century, but over the long arc of modernity, of industrial production, of expanding merchant classes, of the development of consumer economies that required desire to function. The moral valence of luxury inverted. The thing that was once a warning became an aspiration. The thing that had been associated with decadence became associated with success. The transgression of limits became the goal. That inversion was not spontaneous. It was manufactured by specific people, in specific industries, with specific commercial interests in the transformation of luxury from a moral warning into a consumer category. The history of how it happened, of how the concept was rehabilitated, rebranded, and ultimately converted into one of the most powerful engines of economic and social reproduction ever constructed, is the history we need to understand before anything else in this video makes full sense, because you cannot see the system for what it is until you understand that it was built, that someone built it, that the building was deliberate and calculated and oriented from the beginning toward specific outcomes that have nothing to do with your well-being and everything to do with the maintenance of a social order that existed before you were born and is designed to continue existing after you are gone. The desire you feel for certain objects is not yours in the way that hunger is yours or grief is yours or love is yours. Those arise from your biology, your history, your specific irreducible self. The desire for the right logo, the right address, the right table at the right restaurant, that desire was installed, carefully, expensively, over decades of cultural production oriented toward exactly this result. Understanding that does not make the desire disappear. but it changes what the desire means. And changing what the desire means is the first step toward understanding who built the system, how it runs, and most importantly, what it is actually for. Let's talk about what scarcity actually is. Not the economic definition, the gap between supply and demand, the condition that exists when the quantity of something available falls short of the quantity desired. That definition is accurate and almost completely useless for understanding how luxury scarcity works, because luxury scarcity is not a market condition. It is a production decision, a choice, made deliberately, maintained through discipline, and calibrated with a precision that has nothing to do with the economics of production and everything to do with the economics of meaning. Hermes could make more Birkins. This is not a speculation. It is a documented reality that the company's own executives have acknowledged in various forms over the years. The craft is intensive, yes. The training of skilled artisans takes time, yes. But Hermes is a sophisticated industrial organization with significant resources and decades of experience managing skilled production at scale. The waiting lists that extend years into the future, the allocation systems that make certain configurations available only to clients with demonstrated purchase histories, the specific geographic distribution of supply that ensures no market ever reaches a state of comfortable access, these are not the natural outputs of a production constraint. They are a strategy. The strategy is not primarily about price, though it affects price significantly. It is about meaning, about the maintenance of a specific social function, that the object performs a function that requires scarcity as its operating condition, the way a lock requires a key. The object signals membership in a category. The category has value precisely because not everyone can be a member. The moment membership becomes widely accessible, the signal becomes noise. The object stops communicating what it was designed to communicate. And without the communication, the extraordinary premium that the brand commands over the material cost of the object evaporates. Scarcity is the mechanism that keeps the signal legible. But here is the layer beneath the scarcity that almost nobody discusses clearly. The scarcity is not uniform. It is tiring, graduated, managed so that the product is accessible enough to generate the revenue the business requires and scarce enough to maintain the hierarchy the brand depends on. And critically, the tier at which a specific customer is permitted to access specific products is itself a signal. The Birkin that required no waitlist communicates something different from the Birkin that required 3 years and a documented purchase history. The watch delivered to your home by a brand representative communicates something different from the watch you acquired at retail. The table immediately communicates something different from the table that required calling in a favor. The luxury system does not simply sort people into those who have and those who do not. It creates a continuous gradation of having a finely calibrated spectrum along which every person can be precisely located, where the location is communicated through the specific quality of access they receive, and where the desire to move further along the spectrum is reliably produced by the experience of every point short of its end. There is no end of the spectrum. That is the system's most elegant feature. There is always a rarer configuration, a more restricted access, a more exclusive version of the thing you thought was the exclusive version. The ceiling is always above you. The aspiration is structurally inexhaustible. Now understand who designed that structure. Not the current creative directors, who are talented people executing within a framework that preceded them by generations. Not the marketing departments, who optimize within parameters they did not establish. The structure was designed by the founders and the early architects of these brands who understood, with an intuition that subsequent generations have formalized into strategy, that they were not in the product business. They were in the hierarchy business. And hierarchy, to function, requires that every participant have both a clear sense of their current position and a vivid, motivating awareness that a higher position exists and is achievable at sufficient cost. The cost is the point. Not because the brands need the revenue, though they do, because the cost is itself the signal. An object that is expensive simply because it costs a lot to make carries the signal of quality. An object that is expensive because demand consistently exceeds supply at any production level carries something additional. It carries the signal of competitive selection, of having prevailed in a contest not of athletic or intellectual merit, but of resources, relationships, and demonstrated belonging. Winning that contest is what the customer is actually buying. The leather is the vehicle. The victory is the product. The most powerful thing a luxury brand does has nothing to do with design or craft or even scarcity. Every serious luxury brand is, at its deepest level of operation, a narrative institution, an organization whose primary function is the production and maintenance of a story about what the brand is, where it came from, what it represents, and most critically, what it says about the person who chooses it. The story is more important than the product. The product is the physical form through which the story is made transferable. You purchase the object and the story comes with it, attached permanently to the thing you now own, and by extension to you. The narrative institutions that have survived longest and commanded the highest premiums are the ones whose stories are oldest, richest, and most carefully tended. Chanel's story is inseparable from a specific mythology of female independence and aesthetic revolution that was genuinely radical in its original historical context, and that the brand has spent a century amplifying, extending, and protecting against the entropy that time applies to all cultural meaning. Rolex's story is inseparable from a mythology of achievement and exploration of human beings at the limit of what human beings can do, wearing a specific object that shared the limit with them, that the brand constructed through decades of deliberate association with genuinely extreme human endeavors. Neither story is false. The stories are built around real events, real people, real objects that did real things. But the stories as they are told are the specific selection of what is emphasized, the deliberate omission of what complicates the mythology, the continuous work of keeping the narrative alive and relevant across generations that have no direct connection to the original historical moment that is construction. Careful, expensive, strategically oriented construction. And here is what the construction produces that goes far beyond the commercial value of individual products. It produces a shared cultural reference, a common language, a set of associations so widely distributed across the population that the object functions as a communication device transmitting meaning instantly, without explanation, to everyone who shares the cultural context in which the brand's narrative has been embedded. The luxury brand is, in this sense, a technology. A social technology for encoding meaning into physical objects and making that meaning transferable through ownership. The person who owns the object does not have to explain what they mean by owning it. The brand has preloaded the meaning, the object carries it automatically, and the person who receives the communication, who observes the object in its social context, decodes it automatically through the cultural conditioning that the brand has produced in them through decades of narrative production. This communication happens faster than conscious thought, faster than any verbal exchange. In the fraction of a second that it takes to register the presence of a specific object in a specific context, a complete social assessment has been performed. Position has been estimated. Decisions about how to engage have been adjusted. The hierarchy has been navigated without a word being spoken. That speed and automaticity is the power, not the object. The object is the carrier. The power is the instant, wordless, involuntary social computation that the object triggers in everyone who has been conditioned to respond to it. The elite who use luxury most sophisticatedly understand this as an operational reality. They are not buying objects. They are deploying communication devices in specific social contexts for specific communicative purposes. The watch worn to a specific meeting communicates something about the wearer's position before the meeting begins. The car seen in the right context by the right person establishes a social reality before any conversation takes place. The address, the club membership, the specific restaurant, each is a signal operating in a social field, and the person deploying them has understood, with varying degrees of explicit consciousness, what each signal is designed to communicate to which audience. The sophisticated deployer of these signals understands something that the aspirational buyer almost never does. The most powerful signals are not the most expensive ones. They are the most precisely calibrated ones. The signal that communicates the right thing to the right person in the right context, regardless of its absolute cost, is worth more than any amount of undifferentiated expense. The billionaire who wears a watch that is recognized only by people whose recognition matters, in a meeting where those people are present, has communicated something more specific and more powerful than any visible logo could carry. He has communicated knowledge. The knowledge of what the watch is, the knowledge of what that means, the knowledge of where that puts him relative to everyone else in the room who is capable of receiving the signal. That knowledge of the code is the real luxury. Everything else is just the carrier. But here is where the entire system reveals its most dangerous dimension, because what we have described so far, the scarcity, the narrative, the signal, is how luxury creates and maintains hierarchy. What comes next is how hierarchy uses luxury to do something far more consequential than sort people into rooms. And once you see it, the objects never look quite the same again. Here is what the system is actually for. Not for the pleasure of the people at its top, though the pleasure is real. Not for the revenue of the brands that constitute it, though the revenue is substantial. Not even for the social sorting that its visible mechanisms perform, though the sorting is constant and consequential. The system is for reproduction, for the reliable, self-sustaining reproduction of the social order that produced it. For the maintenance, across generations and across the disruptions of politics and economics and culture, of a configuration of power that concentrates resources and decision-making authority in the hands of a small number of people and generates, in everyone else, the specific combination of aspiration and resignation that makes that concentration stable. Aspiration, because the system must constantly recruit from below. It must continuously offer the possibility never fully available, always approaching, always receding or moving up, of earning access, of belonging, eventually to the category that currently excludes you. If the top were truly closed, the system would generate rebellion. The aspiration keeps the energy oriented upward, toward achievement within the system, rather than outward, toward the dismantling of the system itself. Resignation, because the aspiration must ultimately be frustrated. Frustrated just enough that most people conclude, gradually and without any single definitive moment of clarity, that the level they have reached is the level they were meant for, that the gap between where they are and where the system's highest expressions live is a gap of quality of taste, of cultivation, of some genuine attribute they lack, rather than a gap of structural advantage that was built before they arrived, and is maintained by mechanisms that have nothing to do with their individual merit. The genius of this combination of aspiration and resignation, maintained simultaneously, in the same people, across the span of a consuming lifetime, is that it produces exactly the behavior the system requires. Continuous consumption at the level each person can afford, oriented always toward the next level, generating the revenue that sustains the brands that produce the cultural infrastructure that sustains the aspiration that generates the consumption. The wheel turns. Nobody who is turning it experiences it as a wheel. Now watch how the elite use this system as a tool of active control, not merely passive hierarchy maintenance. The executive who controls access to a specific context, a club, an event, a dinner, a conversation, and who deploys that control by extending or withholding invitations is not simply socializing. He is managing a resource. The invitation is currency. Its value depends on the scarcity of the access it grants. The scarcity of the access depends on the executive's willingness to say no to maintain the selectivity that gives the yes its meaning. And the yes, when extended, creates an obligation, not a formal obligation, not a contract, something older and more reliable than either. Reciprocity. The psychology of reciprocity is among the most robust findings in the behavioral science literature. Across cultures, across contexts, across the full range of human social arrangements that anthropology has documented, the receipt of a benefit creates pressure to return a benefit of comparable value. The pressure is not enforced externally, it is felt internally. And at the level of the social elite, where the benefit received is access to a world that most people cannot reach, and that the recipient genuinely values, the internal pressure of reciprocity is powerful enough to shape behavior in ways that no explicit agreement could produce. The person who was brought into the room, who was introduced to the right people, who was given the access that changed the trajectory of their career or their social position, that person does not forget. They do not forget who gave them the access. They do not forget what the access was worth. And they feel, in ways that are entirely genuine and entirely beyond rational override, the pull toward behavior that honors what was given to them. This is how the elite use luxury culture to create networks of influence that operate outside any formal institutional structure, not through corruption, which is crude and exposed, through the cultivation of obligation, through the deliberate, strategic extension of access and inclusion and status validation to people whose future behavior the extender has an interest in influencing. The person who was invited into the right context, given the right introduction, seen in the right room, that person has been recruited into the system's maintenance in the most effective way possible, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, as a beneficiary, as someone who has received something real and who will, without any instruction or explicit expectation, orient their future behavior in ways that protect the source of what they received. The luxury system does not only sort the hierarchy, it staffs it. There is a woman who understood all of this before she was 30. Not through a video, not through a book or a business school case or a conversation in which anyone explained it to her directly. Through observation, through the specific, patient, detail-oriented observation of someone who entered a world she had not been born into and paid attention to how it actually worked rather than how it presented itself. She watched the signals. She mapped the hierarchy not from its public expressions, the visible wealth, the obvious status markers, but from its operational reality. From who deferred to whom in rooms where everyone was nominally equal. From which objects generated what responses in which contexts. From the specific texture of how access was extended and withheld and what the extension and withholding produced in the people it happened to. She learned the code. Not by trying to acquire the objects, though she acquired some, strategically, when the acquisition served a specific communicative purpose. By understanding what the objects were for. By seeing through the surface of the transaction to the social function underneath. By developing the ability to read the signal and, more importantly, to understand who the signal was designed to reach and what it was designed to make them feel. That understanding gave her something more valuable than any object could have. It gave her freedom from the system. Not the freedom of someone who has rejected the system in a gesture of principled refusal that is simply a different kind of participation, organized around opposition rather than aspiration. The freedom of someone who sees the mechanism clearly enough to choose, consciously and specifically, when to engage with it and when not to. Who can deploy the system's signals when deployment serves her interests and decline to be governed by them when it does not. Who can walk into a room full of people whose self-understanding is organized around the luxury markers they have accumulated and see, without resentment and without aspiration, what is actually happening. Who those people are without their markers. What they are actually communicating beneath the surface communication. What they need and fear and want in ways that the markers are designed to conceal. That clarity of vision, in a world organized around carefully maintained obscurity, is itself a form of power. Not the power of resources or access or institutional position. The power of accurate perception, of seeing the game as it is rather than as it presents itself. And here is what accurate perception reveals about the system we have spent this video examining. The system is powerful. It is sophisticated. It has been refined over centuries, and it is maintained by some of the most intelligent and resourced institutions on Earth. It works on almost everyone, almost all of the time, in ways that are genuinely difficult to resist because the resistance has to happen at the level of desire, at the level of what you want, and desire is not easily governed by rational understanding of its origin. But the system has a structural weakness that its sophistication cannot eliminate. It requires your participation. Not your conscious endorsement, not your agreement with its premises or its hierarchy, or its specific valuations of which objects mean what. Just your participation, your engagement with its signals, your willingness to be affected by the presence or absence of the markers, to adjust your social assessments based on what the objects communicate, to feel the pull of the aspiration and the sting of the exclusion. Without that participation, the signal becomes inert. An expensive object owned by someone who neither sends its signal nor receives others, who simply lives with the thing without performing the social computation the system requires is not a luxury object in any operational sense. It is a beautiful thing, possibly a well-made thing. But social technology has been switched off. The elite do not fear people who cannot afford the objects. They fear people who can afford them and choose not to care about them. Not as a political gesture, as a genuine, internalized indifference to the hierarchy the objects maintain. That indifference earned through understanding, not performed through rejection, is the one response the system was not designed to handle, because the system runs on attention, on the specific, charged, desire-laden attention of people who have been made to want what the system offers. Remove the attention and the hierarchy the system maintains loses its hold on the people who were supposed to be held by it. You cannot dismantle the system. It is too large, too old, too thoroughly embedded in the culture that produced you and everyone you know. But you can be done with it. Completely. Quietly. Without announcing it to anyone. That silence, the silence of someone who has seen the mechanism clearly and simply stopped feeding it, is the most powerful response available to anyone who has understood what luxury actually is. Use it if you want. Or don't. The system will continue either way. It has always continued. But it continues on the energy of people who haven't seen it yet. You have. Luxury power exists for one reason only, to reveal what the elite pay to hide. Subscribe to Luxury Power and hit the bell now. Every week a new secret is uncovered. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our global audience. Everything you saw here is based on real cases, verified contracts, and documented facts. We don't glorify wealth, we dissect it. Do you still think money buys freedom? Tell us in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see the truth. And remember, even the most expensive life can be a gilded cage. See you in the next video.